I'm Sarah Mitchell, 33, and for years I've been the family disappointment. While my siblings climbed corporate ladders and bought houses in the suburbs, I was still living in my cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn, freelancing as a graphic designer and barely scraping by. Every family gathering became a battlefield where my mother would shake her head and say, "Sarah, you're wasting your potential." Her words cut deeper each time, especially when she'd compare me to my perfect older sister Jessica, the lawyer, or my younger brother David, the investment banker. I was the creative one, the dreamer, the one who never quite figured it out. At least that's what everyone believed. But what my family didn't know was that for the past 3 years, I'd been quietly building something extraordinary. Something that would not only validate every risk I'd taken, but also expose the truth about who really understood success in our family. The day Forbes called to schedule my cover story interview, I knew everything was about to change. And my mother, she was about to learn what potential really looks like. If you've ever felt like the family black sheep, stay with me. This story is for everyone who's ever been underestimated. The third Sunday of every month, without fail, the Mitchell family gathered at my parents' pristine colonial house in Westport, Connecticut. The same house where I'd grown up feeling like I never quite belonged, where the family photos lining. The hallway told a story of 3 children, but somehow always made me feel invisible. I had pulled my beat-up Honda Civic into the circular driveway, parking behind Jessica's sleek BMW and David's brand new Tesla. Even our cars told the story my mother loved to narrate. The successful lawyer, the rising finance star, and Sarah the one who just couldn't get it together. The dining room was set with Mom's good china, the same pattern she'd been using for these monthly performances for the past 5 years. Everything had to be perfect for the photos she'd post on Facebook later, showing off her accomplished family. I took my usual seat at the far end of the table, the one that somehow always ended up partially cut out of the frame. "Sarah, honey," Mom began, her voice carrying that particular tone I'd learned to dread. Mrs. Henderson mentioned her daughter just got promoted to marketing director at that big firm in Manhattan. She's only 31. She paused, letting the number hang in the air like an accusation. It got me thinking about your situation. Here it comes, I thought, forcing a smile as I cut into my roast beef, the monthly assessment of my failures. I mean, graphic design is nice and all, but when are you going to pursue something more substantial? She gestured vaguely, as if my entire career could be dismissed with a wave of her manicured hand. "You're 33, Sarah. You can't keep wasting your potential forever." Jessica looked up from her plate, her expression a perfect mixture of sympathy and superiority. "Mom's right, Sarah. I know the creative field is tough, but maybe it's time to consider something more stable. I could put in a word at my firm. They're always looking for good paralegals." David nodded enthusiastically, his mouth full of mashed potatoes. "Or finance. The money's incredible, and once you get your foot in the door, the opportunities are endless. I just closed a deal that'll net me a 6-figure bonus this year." I smiled and nodded, playing my role in this familiar script. They had no idea that their little sister, the family disappointment, the one who couldn't get it together, had quietly built something they couldn't even comprehend. The app I'd been developing in secret for 3 years wasn't just successful. It was revolutionary, but they'd never bothered to ask what I was actually working on. "I appreciate the advice," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm actually doing better than you might think." Mom's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Oh, honey, I'm sure you're doing your best. But look at your sister and brother. Real careers. Real success. That's what I'm talking about." As she spoke, I caught sight of the family photo from last Christmas on the sideboard. Jessica and David flanked my parents, all of them beaming with pride, while I stood slightly apart, my smile forced and my posture uncertain. That photo had been taken just 2 months after my app's quiet launch, when I was already processing millions in revenue. But to them, I was still the same struggling dreamer who couldn't find her way. The irony was so thick I could taste it. In a few weeks, when Forbes hit the newsstands, that photo would become a monument to their misjudgment. But for now, I just took another bite of roast beef and let them continue their performance, knowing that soon, very soon, the script would change forever. Back in my studio apartment in Brooklyn, I kicked off my heels and surveyed my modest kingdom. 400 square feet of organized chaos where every inch served a purpose. The Murphy bed folded against the wall to make room for my desk setup during the day. My kitchen was barely large enough for one person to stand in, and the bathroom was so small I had to step into the shower to close the door. But this tiny space held secrets that would shock my family. On my desk, pushed against the one decent-sized window, sat 3 monitors displaying code, user analytics, and design mockups. This wasn't the setup of a struggling freelancer. This was mission control for an empire they couldn't imagine. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my mother worried about my stability, I was running a company from a space smaller than our walk-in closet. I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet and pulled out a thick manila folder. Inside were dozens of rejection letters from my early days venture capitalists who wouldn't take meetings, established companies that dismissed my ideas, investors who thought a young woman with a pretty little app concept wasn't worth their time. Each letter had stung, but I kept them all as fuel for the fire that burned inside me. The first rejection was from Tech Venture Capital, dated 3 years ago. While we appreciate your enthusiasm, we don't see the market potential for your proposed application. The graphic design software market is oversaturated, and we fail to see how your approach offers anything substantially different. The partner had barely looked at my presentation before dismissing me with a condescending smile. Another letter from Riverside Investments. Ms. Mitchell, we suggest you gain more industry experience before pursuing venture capital. Perhaps consider working for an established company to better understand how successful businesses operate. The subtext was clear. You're not ready. You're not serious. You're wasting our time. I spread the letters across my small kitchen table, remembering the sting of each rejection. They'd all said the same thing in different ways. I wasn't enough. My idea wasn't big enough. My experience wasn't deep enough. My vision wasn't clear enough. But their rejection had done something they never intended. It had freed me from needing their approval. Instead of chasing their validation, I'd quietly built my dream with my own hands. Every freelance project I took on, every late night I spent coding, every dollar I scraped together went toward proving them wrong. My apartment might look like the home of someone barely getting by, but appearances had never been more deceiving. The truth was, I could afford a penthouse in Manhattan now. I could buy a house in the Hamptons tomorrow if I wanted. But this little studio had become sacred ground, the place where I transformed from rejected dreamer into tech innovator. I wasn't ready to leave it behind just yet. As I folded the rejection letters back into their folder, I smiled. Soon, those same investors would be calling me, hoping for a meeting, trying to understand how they'd missed the opportunity of a lifetime. But by then, I wouldn't need them anymore. I'd already proven the only thing that mattered, that I'd never been wasting my potential. I'd been building it. The idea came to me on a rainy Tuesday in my senior year at Parsons School of Design. I was sitting in a corner booth at a coffee shop near campus, struggling with a particularly complex design project when frustration finally boiled over. I grabbed a napkin and started sketching not my assignment, but a solution to a problem that had been plaguing me for months. Every designer I knew faced the same challenge. Collaborating with clients and teams on visual projects was a nightmare. Email chains with dozens of file attachments, confusing feedback loops, version control disasters that made everyone want to pull their hair out. There had to be a better way. On that crumpled napkin, I drew the first wireframe for what would eventually become DesignFlow, a collaborative platform that would revolutionize how creative teams work together. It wasn't just another design tool. It was a complete ecosystem that would streamline everything from initial concept to final delivery. But at the time, it was just messy sketches on a piece of paper that I'd later pinned to my dorm room wall. I'd brought the idea home for Thanksgiving that year, excited to share my vision with my family. I should have known better. Look at this, I'd said, spreading my concept drawings across the dining room table after dessert. It's going to change how designers collaborate. Imagine being able to work on projects with people anywhere in the world with real-time feedback and... That's nice, honey, Mom had interrupted, barely glancing at my sketches. But you know these computer things come and go. Maybe you should focus on getting a real job first, then you can play with your little drawings on the weekends. Jessica had been more direct. Sarah, I hate to break it to you, but every art student thinks they're going to change the world with their projects. The reality is that most creative careers are just ... and stable. You need something you can count on. David, fresh out of his MBA program and full of business school wisdom, had delivered. The final blow. The app market is completely saturated. Do you have any idea how many apps fail? You need millions in funding, an experienced team, connections in Silicon Valley. It's not realistic. I gathered up my sketches, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. They dismissed my dream before I could even explain what made it special. In their minds, I was just another naive art student with unrealistic expectations. But that rejection had planted something deeper than hurt. It had planted determination. If they couldn't see the potential, I'd prove it without them. If they thought I needed millions in funding and Silicon Valley connections, I'd build it myself, one line of code at a time. I spent the rest of college learning everything I could about programming, user experience design, and business development. While my classmates were networking at gallery openings, I was in the computer lab until 3 a.m., teaching myself languages that weren't part of my curriculum. I studied successful tech companies, analyzed their growth strategies, and figured out how to bootstrap a startup without external funding. That napkin sketch became my North Star. I laminated it and carried it in my wallet for 3 years, a constant reminder of what I was working toward. Every time someone dismissed my side project or suggested I get serious about my career, I'd feel the weight of that folded napkin in my pocket and remember why I'd started. What my family saw as stubborn refusal to accept reality, I knew was strategic patience. I wasn't wasting my potential, I was quietly accumulating it, storing it up for the moment when I'd finally be ready to show the world what I built. That moment was coming sooner than they thought. The bank statement that changed everything was dated 8 months ago. Balance? $47.23. I kept it folded in my wallet next to that original napkin sketch, a reminder of how close I'd come to giving up. That had been my lowest .3 part-time jobs, ramen noodles for dinner again, and my landlord threatening eviction. I was working as a barista at 6 a.m., doing freelance logo designs during lunch breaks, and serving tables at a restaurant until midnight. Between shifts, in whatever stolen moments I could find, I coded up my family had no idea about the juggling act I was performing. To them, I was just figuring things out while they climbed their conventional ladders of success. They didn't know about the nights I fell asleep at my laptop or the mornings I woke up with keyboard marks on my face. They didn't see me in the 24-hour laundromat at 2 a.m., working on user interface designs while my clothes tumbled in the dryer. Because it was the only place with free Wi-Fi and no distractions, design flow was growing, but slowly, quietly. I couldn't afford marketing campaigns or booth space at industry conferences. Instead, I relied on word of mouth and the organic growth that comes from building something people actually need. Every user was precious, every piece of feedback was gold, every small payment that came through the system felt like validation. The loneliness was the hardest part. When you're building something revolutionary, but you can't tell anyone about it, the weight of secrecy becomes crushing. I'd watch my coworkers at the coffee shop complain about their jobs, knowing I was developing technology that could transform their industry, but I couldn't say a word. The risk of someone stealing my idea, of family interference, of premature judgment, it all kept me silent. I remember one particularly difficult night when my laptop crashed, taking weeks of work with it. I sat on my kitchen floor and cried, surrounded by takeout containers and empty coffee cups, wondering if I was actually wasting my potential like everyone said. Maybe David was right about the app market being oversaturated. Maybe Jessica had a point about needing something more stable. But then I thought about that bank statement, about how far I'd already come from that $47 balance. Every small milestone had been earned through sheer determination. My user base was growing steadily. Client satisfaction scores were through the roof, and industry professionals were starting to notice what I built, even if they didn't know who built it. The breakthrough came gradually, then all at once. First, a small design agency in Portland started using Design Flow for all their client projects. Then a marketing firm in Chicago adopted it company-wide. Within 6 months, I was processing more transactions in a week than I used to see in a year. The revenue wasn't just covering my expenses anymore, it was growing exponentially. But I still served coffee at 6 a.m. and smiled politely when my mother asked if I'd given any more thought to a real career. The disconnect between my secret success and my public struggle created a strange double life. By day, I was Sarah, the struggling freelancer who couldn't afford new shoes. By night, I was the founder of a platform that was quietly revolutionizing creative collaboration across multiple industries. The hardest part wasn't the work. It was watching my family's disappointment grow while knowing I was building something that would eventually dwarf all their achievements combined. Every family dinner became a performance where I played the role of the underachiever while hiding the truth of what I'd actually accomplished. But soon, very soon, the performance would end. And when it did, the people who thought they knew my potential would discover they'd never understood it at all. The review that changed everything appeared on a Tuesday morning at 7:43 a.m. I was getting ready for my shift at the coffee shop when my phone buzzed with a notification from the Design Flow App Store page. User reviews trickled in regularly, but something about this one stopped me cold. This app changed my life. I'm not exaggerating. 3 months ago, my design agency was hemorrhaging clients because our project management was a disaster. File versions scattered across email, feedback. Lost in endless message threads, deadlines missed because nobody knew who was supposed to do what. We were about to close our doors, then we found Design Flow. Within 2 weeks, our entire workflow transformed. Our clients are happier, our team is more productive, and we've landed 3 major contracts because word got out about our efficiency. Whoever built this platform is a genius. Thank you for saving my business. Marcus Chun, Creative Director, Zenith Design Studio. I screenshot that review and stared at it for 20 minutes. This wasn't just positive feedback, it was proof that Design Flow was solving real problems for real people. Marcus Chun's design studio employed 15 people. His business success meant 15 families had job security because of something I'd built in my tiny apartment. Over the next few weeks, similar stories poured in. A freelance illustrator in Austin wrote about doubling her income because Design Flow helped her manage multiple clients efficiently. A branding agency in Seattle credited the platform with saving their most important client relationship. A design student in Chicago said it helped her land her dream internship because she could showcase her collaborative process. But the real validation came from the analytics dashboard I watched obsessively. User engagement was through the roof. People weren't just trying Design Flow, they were adopting it, upgrading to premium plans, and bringing their entire teams onto the platform. The organic growth was exponential, doubling every 6 weeks without any advertising spend. The moment I knew I'd built something extraordinary was when I started receiving emails from industry publications asking for interviews with the founder of Design Flow. They discovered the platform through their own research into emerging design tools. And suddenly everyone wanted to know who was behind this overnight success. Overnight success! If only they knew about the 3 years of 18-hour days, the countless rejections, the bank account that hit $47, and the family dinners where I smiled politely while being told I was wasting my potential. What struck me most was how the success felt both surreal and inevitable. Surreal because I was still serving lattes and living in a studio apartment, going through the motions of my struggling artist life. Inevitable because every positive user review confirmed what I'd believed from the beginning: this platform solved a real problem that millions of creative professionals faced every day. The hardest part was keeping the secret. When my barista coworkers complained about their side hustles failing, or my restaurant colleagues talked about their dreams of making it big someday, I wanted to tell them that sometimes, if you're willing to work in shadows long enough, those dreams actually come true. But I wasn't ready for the world to know Sarah Mitchell yet. There were still bigger milestones ahead, bigger validations waiting. I wanted to be absolutely certain that when I finally stepped into the light, There would be no question about what I'd accomplished. That user review from Marcus Chun became my new talisman, joining the napkin sketch and the $47 bank statement in my collection of motivation artifacts. 3 pieces of paper that told the story of transformation from rejected idea to desperate persistence to undeniable success. Soon, I wouldn't need talismans anymore. Soon, the whole world would know what I'd built. But for now, I folded the screenshot carefully and put it in my wallet, smiled at my reflection in the coffee shop's bathroom mirror, and went out to serve drinks to customers who had no idea they were being waited on by someone who was quietly changing their industry. The first call came while I was restocking pastries at the coffee shop. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, and I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me step into the back room and answer. "Is this Sarah Mitchell, founder of Design Flow?" The voice was crisp, professional, with the kind of confidence that comes from moving millions of dollars around like chess pieces. "Yes, this is Sarah." I tried to keep my voice steady while my heart hammered against my ribs. "This is Catherine Walsh from Sequoia Capital. We've been tracking your platform's growth, and we'd like to discuss investment opportunities. When would be a good time to schedule a call?" Sequoia Capital, the same venture capital firm that had invested in Apple, Google, and WhatsApp. The firm that turned ideas into empires. And they were calling me. I told Catherine I'd call her back and spent the next 10 minutes pacing behind the espresso machine, trying to process what had just happened. This was the same industry that had rejected me 3 years ago, telling me I wasn't ready, that my idea wasn't viable, that I needed more experience. Now they were calling me. The formal term sheet arrived 2 days later via overnight FedEx to my apartment. I signed for it wearing my coffee shop uniform, still smelling like espresso, and wondering if the delivery guy would believe that the document in his hands contained a $50 million investment offer. Inside the envelope was 20 pages of legal language that basically said, "We believe your company is worth $200 million, and we'd like to buy a 25% stake for $50 million. $50 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, like a figure from someone else's life, but Sequoia wasn't the only firm that had discovered Design Flow. Over the next week, my phone rang constantly. Andreessen Horowitz wanted a meeting. Kleiner Perkins sent flowers with their preliminary offer. Even Tech Venture Capital, the same firm that had dismissed me 3 years earlier, called to discuss opportunities. I kept their original rejection letter on my desk while I listened to their pitch. The partner who had barely looked at my presentation was now praising my revolutionary approach to creative collaboration and my exceptional understanding of market dynamics. The irony was so thick I had to mute myself to keep from laughing. The weight of keeping these conversations secret was enormous. I go from discussing million-dollar valuations with Silicon Valley's most prestigious investors to wiping down tables and taking coffee orders, all while pretending my biggest concern was whether we'd run out of oat milk before the afternoon rush. My family had no idea that venture capitalists were competing for the chance to invest in their underachieving daughter's company. At our monthly dinner, while Mom worried about my lack of direction and David lectured me about financial responsibility, I had term sheets worth more than their combined lifetime earnings sitting in my apartment. The most surreal moment came when I was serving coffee to a customer who was reading TechCrunch on his laptop. The headline visible on his screen read, "Mystery Platform Design Flow Disrupts Creative Industry. Founder Identity Unknown." He was literally drinking coffee made by the mysterious founder he was reading about, but beyond the surreal nature of my double life, these investment offers represented something deeper: external validation that I'd built something genuinely valuable. These weren't polite compliments or family encouragement. These were hard-nosed investors who had done their due diligence, analyzed my user metrics, studied my financial projections, and concluded that Design Flow was worth risking tens of millions of dollars. The little girl who had been dismissed at Thanksgiving dinner, whose sketches were called silly drawings, had built a company that some of the smartest money in Silicon Valley wanted to own a piece of. The family member who was constantly told she was wasting her potential had created something that industry experts valued at 9 figures. I kept the Sequoia term sheet in my kitchen drawer, right next to the takeout menus and grocery store coupons. Sometimes I'd pull it out while eating ramen noodles and marvel at the contrast. A document worth $50 million filed between a pizza delivery menu and a coupon for laundry detergent. Soon. Very soon I'd have to decide which offer to accept. But more importantly, I'd have to decide when to stop hiding and step into the identity these investors already knew I was. Sarah Mitchell, tech entrepreneur, industry disruptor, and the woman who had turned her family's doubt into fuel for building an empire they never saw coming. Jessica showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Thursday afternoon, clutching her leather briefcase like a shield and wearing the expression she reserved for difficult clients and disappointing family members. I'd just finished a video call with 3 potential investors when I heard her knock. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into my studio. Her eyes swept the small space with barely concealed judgment. The Murphy bed, the tiny kitchen, the secondhand furniture I'd collected over the years. "Sarah, this has gone on long enough." She set her briefcase on my kitchen table with the kind of theatrical precision that made everything feel like a legal proceeding. From it, she pulled a stack of papers and her business card, placing both deliberately in front of me like evidence in a case. "I've been thinking about our conversation at dinner last week," she began, settling into my single chair like she was conducting a deposition. "Mom's right to be concerned. You're 33 years old, living in a studio apartment, working multiple part-time jobs. This isn't sustainable." I glanced at her business card. Jessica Mitchell, senior partner, Hartwell and Associates. The same title that had intimidated me for years, back when I thought success meant impressing people like Jessica. Now, knowing that her entire annual salary was less than what Design Flow generated in a single month, the card looked more like participation trophy. "I've spoken with the partners at my firm," she continued, "and we have an opening for a paralegal position. It's entry-level, but it's stable. Steady paycheck, health insurance, a clear path for advancement. You could start next month." The irony was breathtaking. My sister, who earned $150,000 a year and thought she was financially successful, was offering me career advice while I sat on investment offers worth $50 million. She was trying to rescue me from a life she saw as failure, not knowing that I was living a double life that would make her accomplishments look insignificant. "I appreciate the offer, Jess, but I'm actually doing fine with my current work." She laughed, not meanly, but with the kind of gentle condescension that hurt more than outright cruelty. "Sarah, honey, serving coffee and doing little design projects isn't a career. It's what you do until you figure out your real career. And I'm worried you're running out of time to figure that out." I wanted to show her my laptop, to pull up the Design Flow dashboard with its climbing user numbers and revenue projections. I wanted to tell her about the Sequoia Capital term sheet in my kitchen drawer, about the industry publications calling me a visionary, about the fact that her little sister's silly computer project was revolutionizing how creative professionals worked. Instead, I nodded and smiled, playing the role she expected me to play. "The legal field is incredibly rewarding," she went on, warming to her topic. "It's intellectually challenging, financially stable, and there's real respect that comes with it. People take you seriously when you tell them you're an attorney. They know you've accomplished something." The word accomplished hung in the air between us. Jessica saw herself as accomplished because she'd followed a traditional path law school. Big firm, partnership track. She measured success in titles and annual salaries, in the kind of external validation that came from doing what everyone expected successful people to do. But sitting there in my tiny apartment, surrounded by the humble trappings of my cover story, I realized that I'd redefined accomplishment entirely. I built something from nothing, solved problems for thousands of people, created value that the smartest investors in the world wanted to own. And I'd done it all while my family worried about my potential being wasted. "I'll think about it," I told her, because that's what she needed to hear. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand with genuine affection. "I just want what's best for you, Sarah. We all do. You're so talented, but talent without direction is just, well, it's potential that never gets realized." After she left, I sat alone with her business card and thought about potential. "Jessica," saw mine as unrealized because it didn't look like hers. But potential isn't about following someone else's definition of success. It's about becoming who you're meant to be, even if nobody else can see it yet. 3 years ago, her condescension would have crushed me. Today, it just made me smile, because soon, very soon, Jessica would discover that her little sister hadn't been wasting her potential at all. She'd been quietly building an empire that would make her sister's prestigious law career look like a side hobby. But first, I had a Forbes interview to prepare for. David cornered me after Jessica's visit, armed with spreadsheets and the kind of financial confidence that comes from managing other people's money. He'd driven up from Manhattan in his Tesla specifically to stage this intervention, and he wasn't leaving until he'd saved me from my financial ignorance. "Sarah, we need to have a serious conversation about your future," he announced, spreading printouts across my kitchen table like he was preparing to deliver quarterly earnings to shareholders. "I've been analyzing your situation, and the numbers are concerning." I glanced at his portfolio performance summary, a document he clearly printed to impress me. His investment returns were solid, the kind of steady growth that financial advisors love to show off. 7-figure portfolio value, diversified holdings, and an annual return that put him in the top percentile of investors his age. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a graph with the intensity of someone revealing a scientific breakthrough. "This is what consistent, disciplined investing looks like. I started with nothing after business school, but by following proven strategies and making smart choices, I've built real wealth." Real wealth. The phrase almost made me laugh out loud. David's real wealth represented about 6 weeks of DesignFlow's current revenue run rate. His most successful investment year had generated less profit than my platform made in a typical month. But he had no way of knowing that his big sister's hobby project was generating the kind of returns that would make his portfolio look like a child's piggy bank. "The problem with creative careers," he continued, pulling out another spreadsheet, "is that they don't build long-term wealth. You're trading time for money, which is the lowest form of income generation. What you need is passive income, investment growth, real financial strategy." He'd prepared a presentation for me, complete with charts showing the difference between linear income and compound growth. It was actually quite impressive, the kind of thorough analysis that had made him successful in his field. Under any other circumstances, I would have been grateful for his concern and expertise. "I've run some projections based on what I estimate your current income to be," he said, sliding another graph toward me. "If you continue on your current path, by age 65, you'll have maybe $200,000 saved for retirement. That's barely enough to maintain a basic lifestyle." The irony was stunning. David was explaining compound interest to someone whose net worth had grown by several $1,000,000 just since our last family dinner. He was lecturing me about passive income while I was fielding calls from investors who wanted to give me tens of millions for a piece of my hobby. "But here's the good news," he said, his voice taking on the enthusiasm of someone about to reveal the solution to all my problems. "It's not too late to turn this around. I can set you up with my financial advisor, help you establish proper investment accounts, create a real wealth building strategy." David pulled out his business card and wrote his advisor's contact information on the back. "This guy manages portfolios worth hundreds of millions. He usually doesn't take clients with less than $1 million in assets, but I can get you in as a favor. You'll need to start with smaller amounts, but if you're disciplined about it, you could have a respectable nest egg by retirement." I looked at his business card, David Mitchell, Senior Vice President, Strategic Investments. The title that had always made me feel inadequate, that represented everything my family thought I should aspire to. Now it just looked quaint, like someone proudly displaying their participation ribbon at the Olympics. "David, I really appreciate you thinking about my financial future," I said, meaning it sincerely despite the absurdity of the situation. "But I think I'm more financially secure than you realize." He shook his head with the patient smile of someone explaining basic math to a child. "Sarah, I know you think your freelance work is going well, but unless you're pulling in 6 figures consistently, you're not building real wealth. And even if you were, without proper investment strategy, high income doesn't automatically translate to financial security. 6 figures I made more than David's annual salary in an average week, but I couldn't tell him that without revealing everything. So I sat there, nodding thoughtfully while my little brother explained to me why his mid-six-figure portfolio made him qualified to give financial advice to someone whose company had just been valued at 9 figures by Silicon Valley's top investors. The key is starting now, he concluded, gathering his papers with the satisfaction of someone who just solved a complex problem. Every year you wait is exponential growth you're missing out on. But if you commit to this strategy and stick with it, you could still retire comfortably. After he left, I sat alone with his financial projections and his advisor's contact information. In his world, I was a financial disaster waiting to happen, a creative type who didn't understand money, living paycheck to paycheck without any real security or future planning. But tomorrow, Forbes would call to schedule my cover story interview, and soon my little brother would discover that his lectures about building wealth had been delivered to someone who had already built more in 3 years than he'd accumulate in his entire career. The student he thought needed financial education was actually the teacher he never knew he was talking to. The letter arrived on cream-colored stationery, my mother's careful cursive filling 3 pages with the kind of emotional manipulation that had taken her 62 years to perfect. I found it slipped under my apartment door on a Friday morning, my name written on the envelope in the same handwriting that had labeled my childhood lunch boxes and signed permission slips. "My dearest Sarah," it began, and I already knew this wasn't going to be a casual note. I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation, and I feel I need to be completely honest with you about my concerns. As your mother, I have watched you struggle for years now, and I can no longer stand by and watch you waste the gifts God gave you. I settled into my chair with coffee, preparing myself for the emotional journey my mother was about to take me on. Her letters were always masterclasses in guilt, disappointment, and conditional love wrapped in the language of concern. Your father and I have given you every opportunity to find your path. We paid for your expensive art school education, supported you through your various phases, and watched hopefully as you explored different careers. But Sarah, at 33, it's time to stop exploring and start building a real life. The phrase real life was underlined twice, as if emphasis could make it more meaningful. In my mother's world, real life meant following a script she understood: marriage, mortgage, career ladder, grandchildren. Anything outside that narrow definition was just an extended adolescence that needed to be corrected. I've spoken with Jessica and David about our family situation, and we're all in agreement that something needs to change. We cannot continue to enable behavior that is ultimately destructive to your future. Therefore, I'm writing to inform you of a decision your father and I have made. Here it comes, I thought, recognizing the build-up to her ultimatum. If you have not secured stable employment by your 34th birthday employment with benefits, security, and real growth potential, we will have no choice but to cut financial ties with you completely. No more emergency loans, no more help with rent when you fall short, no more safety net. It breaks my heart to write these words, but we believe it's the only way to force you to take your life seriously. The threat was both crushing and absurd. Crushing because it represented my mother's complete loss of faith in me as a person. Absurd because she was threatening to withdraw financial support from someone who no longer needed it, like threatening to take away training wheels from a professional cyclist. I want you to understand that this decision comes from love, not anger. We see so much potential in you, Sarah, but potential means nothing if it's never realized. You are intelligent, creative, and capable of so much more than serving coffee and drawing pictures on computers. But you need structure, accountability, and the security that comes from building something real. Drawing pictures on computers. 3 years of revolutionary software development, millions in revenue, industry recognition, and venture capital courtship, all reduced to drawing pictures on computers in my mother's mind. Your sister has offered you a real opportunity at her law firm. Your brother has connections in the finance world that could open doors for you. We have resources and relationships that could help you build a proper career, but you have to want it. You have to be willing to grow up and leave this artistic fantasy behind. The final paragraph was the most painful. I'm not asking you to give up creativity entirely, darling. You can always pursue art as a hobby on weekends and evenings once you've established yourself professionally. But this dream of making a living from your computer projects, it's time to let it go. It's time to join the real world and build a life your family can be proud of. She signed it, "With all my love and hope for your future, Mom," as if her ultimatum was just another expression of maternal care. I read the letter 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of irony. My mother was threatening to disown me for wasting my potential at the exact moment when Forbes was preparing to feature me as one of tech's most promising young entrepreneurs. She was demanding I get serious about my career while venture capitalists competed to invest $50 million in the company I'd built with those computer pictures. The woman who thought my life was falling apart had no idea that her daughter had already succeeded beyond her wildest imagination. The family members she was trying to save from failure had quietly become more successful than the rest of them combined. But more than the irony, what struck me was the sadness of it all. My mother's letter revealed how completely she'd misunderstood who I was and what I was capable of. Her love was real, but it was conditional on me becoming someone she could understand, someone who fit her definition of success. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my kitchen drawer, right next to the venture capital term sheets and rejection letters. Soon, very soon, I'd be able to show her that her daughter hadn't been wasting her potential at all. But first, I needed to decide whether someone who could threaten to disown me for not living up to her expectations deserved to share in the triumph of what I'd actually accomplished. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was restocking napkins at the coffee shop. I stepped into the back room, my hands shaking as I accepted the call that would change everything. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Rebecca Chun from Forbes magazine. We'd like to feature you as our cover story for next month's issue on Tech Visionaries Under 35. Would you be available for an interview this week?" I'd been expecting this call ever since Design Flow started getting attention from industry publications. But hearing the words out loud still felt surreal. Forbes didn't just interview anyone, they curated success stories that defined entire industries. "I'd be honored," I managed, trying to keep my voice professional while my heart raced. "Wonderful. We're particularly interested in your journey, from unknown founder to industry disruptor. Our research suggests Design Flow has revolutionized creative collaboration in ways that established companies couldn't achieve with unlimited resources." "How did you do it?" The interview took place via video call from my studio apartment. I cleaned obsessively, positioning my laptop to show my desk setup while hiding the Murphy bed and tiny kitchen. Rebecca Chun appeared on screen sharp, professional, with the kind of confident energy that comes from interviewing world leaders and industry titans. "Let's start with the numbers," she said, consulting her notes. Design Flow currently serves over 200,000 active users across 50 countries, with monthly revenue growth of 40%. Industry analysts are calling it the fastest growing design platform in history. Most people would assume you have a massive team, significant funding, state-of-the-art facilities. But our research suggests otherwise. I smiled, knowing this was the moment that would captivate readers. Actually, I built the entire platform myself, from my apartment with no external funding until recently. It's been just me for 3 years. Rebecca's eyebrows rose. "You're telling me that a single person, working alone, created a platform that's outcompeting companies with hundreds of developers and millions in venture capital?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." What followed was 2 hours of the most intense professional conversation of my life. Rebecca wasn't just interviewing me, she was excavating my story, uncovering details that would resonate with Forbes readers who understood the magnitude of what I'd accomplished. She wanted to know about the rejection letters, the $47 bank account, the 3 part-time jobs that funded my development work. She was fascinated by the strategic decision to stay anonymous while building market dominance, by the contrast between my public struggles and private success. What drives someone to work in shadows for 3 years, building an empire that nobody knows about? She asked. "Belief," I answered simply. When you know you're creating something revolutionary, external validation becomes less important than internal conviction. I didn't need investors or industry recognition to know Design Flow was special. The users told me that every day. She leaned forward, clearly intrigued, but maintaining that level of secrecy while your personal life looked like failure. That must have been psychologically challenging. The hardest part wasn't the secrecy, I admitted. It was watching people I love lose faith in me because they couldn't see what I was building. Having family members offer career advice while sitting on investment offers worth more than their lifetime earnings. That was complex. Rebecca's questions grew more specific, more probing. She wanted details about my development process, my user acquisition strategy, my revenue model. She was building a case study in bootstrap entrepreneurship that would inspire and educate other founders. Industry insiders are calling you a stealth genius, she said, reading from her research. Someone who understood that sustainable growth beats publicity, that product quality trumps marketing spend. Was this strategy intentional? Completely intentional. I watched too many promising startups burn through millions in funding while forgetting to build products people actually needed. I wanted to prove that extraordinary success was possible with extraordinary execution, not extraordinary marketing. Budgets. Near the end of the interview, Rebecca asked the question I'd been preparing for. What do you want people to understand about your story? I thought about my mother's letter, about Jessica's job offer, about David's financial lectures. I want people to understand that potential isn't always visible from the outside. Sometimes the family member everyone worries about is actually the one building something extraordinary. Success doesn't always look like what we expect it to look like. After the call ended, I sat in my quiet apartment and processed what had just happened. In 2 weeks, my face would be on the cover of Forbes magazine. The story of my secret success would be read by millions of people, including everyone who had doubted, dismissed, or tried to rescue me from my supposed failure. The mock-up Rebecca sent later that day showed my professional headshot above the headline, The $200 Million Secret, How Sarah Mitchell Built a Tech Empire in Her Studio Apartment. Seeing it felt like stepping into an alternate reality, where the truth about my life was finally visible to everyone who had misunderstood it. Soon, very soon, I wouldn't be the family disappointment anymore. I'd be the Forbes cover story they'd never saw coming. The Forbes photo shoot took place in a Manhattan studio that looked like something from a movie about successful people. Floor-to-ceiling windows, exposed brick walls, professional lighting equipment that cost more than most people's cars, and a team of stylists who treated me like I was already famous. We want to capture the contrast, explained Marcus, the photographer, as he adjusted another light. The young entrepreneur who built an empire from nothing. Confident but approachable. Powerful but relatable. Think next generation of tech leadership. They brought a wardrobe for me, tailored blazers, designer dresses, accessories that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But what struck me most was how naturally I fit into this world that I never experienced before. After 3 years of hiding my success, stepping into the role of tech visionary felt like coming home. Tell me about the moment you knew design flow was going to be huge, Marcus said, snapping photos while we talked. He'd learned that I was more relaxed when engaged in conversation, and my best expressions came when I was explaining my passion. For the platform. There wasn't one moment, I said, turning slightly as he directed. It was more like watching puzzle pieces fall into place. User engagement metrics that exceeded every projection. Revenue growth that felt almost surreal. Industry professionals reaching out to understand what we'd built. What I didn't mention was the surreal disconnect between those professional victories and my personal life. While Design Flow was breaking records, I was still serving coffee to customers who had no idea. They were interacting with the founder of the platform they might be using at work. The behind the scenes photographer captured something I didn't expect moments. Between poses where my guard was down, where the weight of carrying the secret for 3 years was visible on my face. Those candid shots told a different story than the confident executive portraits. They showed someone who had been quietly carrying the burden of extraordinary success in isolation. These images are incredible, said Sarah, the art director, reviewing the shots on her camera. There's something in your eyes, like you've been waiting your whole life for this moment. She wasn't wrong. For 3 years, I'd been living a double life, playing the role of struggling freelancer while building something revolutionary. This photo shoot was my emergence from shadows into light, from secrecy into recognition, from underestimated family member into Forbes cover story. During wardrobe changes, I checked my phone and found 17 missed calls from venture capital firms. Word was spreading through Silicon Valley that Forbes was featuring the mysterious design flow founder, and everyone wanted to be first in line for the investment opportunity they'd overlooked. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, these same firms had rejected me without a second glance. Now they were competing for my attention, trying to understand how they missed the next big thing when it was standing right in front of them. For the cover shot, we want something that says tech royalty, Marcus explained, positioning me in front of a city backdrop. You're joining an exclusive club of founders who've changed entire industries before age 35. How does that feel? Surreal, I admitted. 3 years ago, I was just someone with an idea and a laptop. Today, I'm being photographed for Forbes. The transformation still doesn't feel completely real, but it was real. The photos proved it, capturing someone who had successfully navigated the impossible journey from rejected dreamer to industry leader. They showed confidence earned through years of quiet determination, success built one line of code at a time, vision validated by millions of users who had found exactly what they needed in something I'd created. The final shot of the day was my favorite, a close-up where I was looking directly into the camera with an expression that was part satisfaction, part anticipation. It captured someone who had just finished proving everyone wrong and was ready for whatever came next. As the team packed up equipment, I realized this photo shoot marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Soon, these images will be seen by my family, my former colleagues, everyone who had dismissed my potential or tried to rescue me from my mistakes. But more than vindication, these photos represented freedom, the freedom to stop hiding who I'd become, to live authentically in the success I'd built, to let the world see what 3 years of relentless determination had created. Tomorrow, the magazine would go to print. Next week, it would hit newsstands. And then, finally, the family that thought they knew my potential would discover they'd never understood it at all. The Forbes issue hit newsstands on a Thursday morning. I walked to 3 different locations before I found the courage to actually pick up a copy, and when I finally held the magazine in my hands, seeing my face on the cover felt like looking at someone else's life. The $200 million secret, how Sarah Mitchell built a tech empire in her studio apartment, stretched across the cover in bold letters beneath my photograph. The woman in the image looked confident, successful, like someone who belonged on magazine covers. It was hard to reconcile that polished professional with the person who had served coffee just 2 weeks earlier. I bought 5 copies from the newsstand in Brooklyn, then drove to Manhattan to buy 5 more. Each purchase felt like confirmation that this was really happening. I was the Forbes cover story. My 3-year secret was now public knowledge, and the world was about to discover what my family had missed. The article itself was 6 pages of my life transformed into a business case study. Rebecca Chen had crafted my story beautifully, capturing not just the numbers, but the human journey behind them. She wrote about the rejection letters, the $47 bank account, the family dinners where I smiled politely while hiding millions in revenue. Mitchell represents a new archetype in tech entrepreneurship, the article concluded. The stealth founder who builds empires in silence, who values sustainable growth over viral publicity, who proves that extraordinary success often happens in ordinary places. Her story challenges our assumptions about what potential looks like and where the next generation of tech leaders will emerge. By afternoon, my phone was ringing constantly. TechCrunch wanted a follow-up interview. The Wall Street Journal was preparing a feature on bootstrap entrepreneurship. 3 major podcasts had reached out for appearances. The professional world that had ignored me for 3 years was suddenly desperate for my attention. But the calls I was really waiting for hadn't come yet. My family hadn't contacted me since the magazine appeared on stands, and I wondered if they'd even seen it. Part of me hoped they'd discover it naturally, walking past a newsstand and doing a double take at the familiar face on the cover. Part of me wanted to drive to Connecticut and leave a copy on their doorstep with a note that simply said, "Potential realized." The industry reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Designflow's user acquisition spiked. 300% as design professionals discovered the platform through the Forbes coverage. My LinkedIn inbox flooded with connection requests from CEOs, investors, and industry leaders who wanted to explore collaboration opportunities. The secret empire I'd built in shadows was suddenly the most talked about success story in tech. What struck me most was how the narrative had shifted overnight. Yesterday, I was Sarah Mitchell, the family disappointment who couldn't get her life. Today, I was Sarah Mitchell, visionary entrepreneur whose unconventional path had led to extraordinary success. The same person, the same achievements, but suddenly viewed through a completely different lens. I spent the evening in my studio apartment, the same space where I'd built everything, surrounded by copies of the magazine that had transformed my public identity. The Murphy bed, the tiny kitchen, the desk where I coded for 3 years, everything looked the same, but felt different now that the secret was out. The most surreal moment came when I opened my laptop and saw that the Forbes article had been shared over 50,000 times on social media. People were commenting on my story, calling it inspiring, using it as proof that success could come from anywhere. Strangers were celebrating achievements that my own family had never recognized. But tomorrow was Friday, which meant dinner at my parents' house in 2 days. The monthly ritual where I played the role of underachiever while they offered advice and expressed concern about my wasted potential. This time would be different. This time, I'd arrive as the Forbes cover story they never saw coming. I picked up one of the magazines and studied my own face on the cover, trying to prepare for the conversation that would reshape every family dinner for the rest of our lives. The woman in the photograph looked ready for anything. I hoped she was right. The little girl who had been dismissed for her silly computer drawings was about to show her family exactly what those drawings had become. And after 3 years of hiding in shadows, I was finally ready to step into the light and own every achievement they never bothered to notice. I arrived at my parents' house carrying a copy of Forbes in my purse like a secret weapon. The magazine felt heavier than it should have, weighted with 3 years of hidden truth and the power to rewrite every assumption my family had made about my life. The dining room looked exactly the same Mom's good china. The family photos on the sideboard. My usual seat at the far end of the table where I'd absorbed years of well-meaning disappointment, but everything felt different now. I wasn't arriving as the struggling daughter who needed career advice. I was arriving as the Forbes cover story they never saw coming. "Sarah, honey," Mom began before I'd even sat down, "I hope you received my letter. Your father and I have been discussing your situation, and we really think it's time to make some serious changes." "Actually, Mom, there's something I need to show you," I said, reaching for my purse, but she was already in full lecture mode, the words spilling out with practiced concern. "I know change is scary, darling, but you can't keep living like this indefinitely. You're 33 years old, and it's time to build a real future. Jessica's job offer is still open, and David has connections that could—" "Mom," I interrupted gently, placing the Forbes magazine face down on the table. "Before we talk about my future, maybe you should know what I've actually been building for the past 3 years. Jessica looked up from her salad, curiosity flickering across her face. David paused mid-bite, fork suspended in the air. Dad set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. The room fell silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock. In the hallway, I flipped the magazine over. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Mom's eyes moved from the cover to my face and back to the cover, as if she couldn't process what she was seeing. Jessica's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been shock. David's mouth actually fell open. "This is ... double quotes." Mom's voice trailed off. She picked up the magazine with trembling hands, studying my photograph. "As if it might be an elaborate trick, this is really you? The $200 million secret?" Dad read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. How Sarah Mitchell built a tech empire in her studio apartment. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, turning the screen toward them. The balance showed 8 figures more money than the rest of my family would earn in their combined lifetimes. "This is my actual financial situation, David, in case you were still worried about my retirement planning." The number on the screen seemed to break something in the room's atmosphere. Jessica stared at the phone like it was displaying impossible information. David blinked rapidly, as if he could clear his vision and see something different. You're telling us, Jessica said slowly, that while we've been worrying about your career, you've been ... What, running a tech company? Not just running it. I built it alone, from my studio apartment, while you were all giving me advice about getting serious about my life. I tried to keep my voice gentle, but 3 years of hidden frustration colored my words. DesignFlow has over 200,000 users across 50 countries. Venture capitalists are competing to invest $50 million in it. Forbes called me a stealth genius. Mom was reading the article now, her finger following the lines of text as if she needed physical contact to believe what she was seeing. It says here you've been working on this for 3 years. 3 years, Sarah. Why didn't you tell us? The question hung in the air, loaded with hurt and confusion. Why hadn't I told them? Because every time I tried to share my vision, they dismissed it. Because they called my work silly drawings and computer projects. Because their love felt conditional on me becoming someone they could understand. Because every time I mentioned what I was working on, you told me to get a real job, I said simply. Because you saw my potential as wasted instead of invested. Because I got tired of being treated like the family failure when I was actually building something extraordinary. David was staring at the Forbes cover like it held answers to questions he didn't know he should be asking. The app we heard about at work.designflow ... That's yours. That's mine. People at my firm are using it. They say it's revolutionary. It is. The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had. Questions came in waves. How did I learn to code? Where did the idea come from? How did I manage to build something so complex alone? I answered each one, watching my family's perception of me transform in real time. But the most telling moment came when Mom asked, "Why didn't you trust us enough to share this with us?" "Because trust is earned," I replied, thinking of her ultimatum letter. And for 3 years, every conversation we had about my future was about how I was disappointing you. How was I supposed to share my biggest achievement with people who couldn't see any achievement in my life at all? The room fell quiet again. The magazine sat in the center of the table like evidence in a case that had just been solved. The daughter they thought they knew struggling, directionless, wasting. Her potential had never existed. In her place was someone they never bothered to see. An entrepreneur, an innovator, a success story that had been hiding in plain sight. "I don't understand," Mom whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "How did we get it so wrong?" "Because you were measuring my potential by your definition of success," I said. "And I was building something bigger than you could imagine." The text messages started before I even made it back to Brooklyn.Jessica. "I can't stop thinking about dinner. I feel like I don't even know who you are anymore. Call me when you get home. David, just Google DesignFlow." "Holy shit, Sarah. Holy shit. Why didn't you tell us?" "Mom, honey, I'm so confused and proud and sorry all at once. Can we talk tomorrow? I need to understand how this happened." Dad was the most succinct. "Proud of you, kiddo. Always was, even when I didn't understand what you were building." I sat in my studio apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my double life, the Murphy bed, the tiny kitchen, the desk where I'd built an empire while my family worried about my future. My phone kept buzzing with notifications as word spread through our extended network. Apparently, Jessica had shared the Forbes article on social media, and suddenly everyone who had ever questioned my choices was discovering the truth. The most interesting response came from my cousin Rachel, who had always been held up as another example of doing things right, married at 25, house in the suburbs, 2 kids, stable job. Her message was longer than the others. "Sarah, I just saw the Forbes article and I'm sitting in my car crying in the grocery store parking lot. Do you know how many times I've defended your choices to family members who thought you were lost? Do you know how many times I wished I had your courage to pursue something I actually cared about instead of just following the safe path. I'm so proud of you and so angry that you had to hide this from us, and so inspired that someone in our family had the guts to build something extraordinary. You're my hero. That message hit harder than all the others combined. It made me realize that my secret hadn't just affected me. It had affected everyone who had tried to support me without knowing what they were supporting. Everyone who had defended choices they didn't understand. Everyone who had wondered if there was more to my story than what was visible on the surface. But not all the responses were positive. An old college friend who had always been competitive with me left a comment on Jessica's Facebook post. Funny how she never mentioned any of this when we caught up last year. Makes you wonder what else she's been hiding. The implication stung that my secrecy was somehow deceptive rather than protective. The most difficult call came from my mother at 11 p.m. I've been reading every article I can find about your company, she said without preamble. The Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch, something called VentureBeat. Sarah, they're all saying the same thing, that you're some kind of genius who appeared out of nowhere. I didn't appear out of nowhere, Mom. I've been here the whole time. You just weren't looking. That's what I can't understand. How did I miss this? How did we all miss this? Her voice was thick with emotion. I keep thinking about my letter, about threatening to cut you off financially. God, Sarah, you probably make more in a month than your father and I make in a year. Money isn't the point. Then what is the point? She interrupted. Help me understand, because I feel like I failed as a mother. My daughter built something incredible, and instead of supporting her, I was trying to force her into a box that was way too small. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. For the first time, my mother wasn't trying to fix me or guide me or express disappointment in my choices. She was trying to understand who I actually was instead of who she thought I should be. The point, I said carefully, is that love shouldn't be conditional on someone living up to your expectations. For 3 years, I felt like I had to choose between your approval and my dreams. I chose my dreams, but I shouldn't have had to choose. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd been disconnected. You're right, she finally whispered. You're absolutely right, and I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you from failure, but I was actually protecting myself from having to trust you. That insight that her worry had been about her own fear rather than my actual capabilities felt like the key to understanding our entire relationship. She hadn't been able to see my potential because she'd been too afraid of watching me fail to let me succeed. What happens now? She asked. Now we try to build a relationship based on who I actually am instead of who you think I should be. I sighed. And maybe you start trusting that your daughter might know what she's doing, even when it doesn't look like what you expected. After we hung up, I realized that revealing my secret had accomplished something more important than proving my success. It had forced my family to confront their assumptions about potential, about success, about what it means to support someone you love. The daughter they thought needed saving had been fine all along. But maybe, finally, we could all stop pretending otherwise. The first apology came via voicemail while I was in a meeting with potential investors. Mom's voice filled my car speakers during the drive home, rambling and emotional in the way that revealed more than she probably intended. Sarah, honey, it's... Mom, I've been thinking about everything since dinner, and I just... I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not seeing what you were building. I'm sorry for my letter. I'm sorry for all those dinners where I made you feel small. I was just so worried about your future, and I guess I couldn't see that you were already building it. The voicemail continued for nearly 3 minutes, cycling through justifications and apologies and attempts to explain her behavior. I know you probably think I don't believe in you, but that's not true. I've always believed in you. I just didn't understand what you were doing, and when I don't understand something, I get scared. And when I get scared, I try to control it. I know that's not fair to you. What struck me most was what was missing from her apology. Any real acknowledgement that her behavior had been wrong, not just misguided. She was sorry for not seeing my success, but not for trying to force me into a life I didn't want. She was sorry for worrying, but not for making her worry my responsibility to fix. Jessica's approach was more direct but equally problematic. She showed up at my apartment with coffee and an expression that was part contrition, part curiosity. "I need to understand something," she said, settling into my kitchen chair with the air of someone conducting an investigation. "Were you planning this whole time to humiliate us? To let us give you advice while you were secretly more successful than all of us combined?" The question revealed so much about how she saw the situation. In Jessica's mind, my success was somehow an attack on her. My secrecy was a deliberate strategy to make her look foolish. She couldn't imagine that I might have hidden my achievements for reasons that had nothing to do with her. "Jess, this was never about you," I said gently. "It was about protecting something important to me from people who couldn't understand." But you let me offer you a paralegal job. You sat there and listened to me lecture you about stability and real careers, while you were running a company worth hundreds of millions. How is that not humiliating?" Her wounded pride was understandable, but misplaced. She was more upset about looking foolish than about the fact that her sister had felt unable to share the most important thing in her life with her family. David's response was perhaps the most telling. He sent a series of texts that revealed his struggle to reconcile my success with his assumptions about how success should look. "I keep thinking about my financial advice and wanting to disappear into the floor. How long have you been laughing at us behind our backs? I showed your Forbes article to my team, and now they want to know if you're taking meetings with investment firms. This is so weird. Like, I'm proud of you, but also kind of pissed that you made us all look like idiots." That last text captured the complexity of their reactions perfectly. They were proud of my achievement, but resentful that it had come at the cost of their assumptions about themselves as the successful siblings who needed to guide their struggling sister. The most frustrating part was how quickly they all tried to rewrite history. Suddenly, they claimed they'd always known I was capable of great things, that they'd just been worried about my unconventional path. The 3 years of monthly dinners where they'd expressed genuine disappointment and my choices became reframed as supportive concern. But the voicemail that revealed the most came from Mom 3 days later, when she thought she was leaving a message but had actually called during a pocket dial. I heard her talking to Dad in the background. "I just don't understand how she could keep something like this from us for 3 years. It makes me question everything I thought I knew about her. And frankly, Harold, it makes us look like fools. What are people going to think when they find out we had no idea our own daughter was building an empire?" That accidental message crystallized something important. Their apologies weren't really about my feelings or their behavior. They were about their own discomfort with looking like parents who didn't know their child. They were sorry for being wrong, not for being unsupportive. The non-apology that hurt most came from Jessica during her 3rd visit that week. "I just want you to know that even though this whole situation has been difficult, I'm really happy for your success. I hope you can understand why we reacted the way we did. It's just been a shock to discover that everything we thought we knew was wrong." "What if, instead of apologizing for being shocked," I suggested, "you apologized for making me feel like I couldn't trust you with the most important thing in my life?" She looked genuinely confused by the suggestion. "But you could have trusted us. We would have supported you if we'd known how serious this was." "But I tried to tell you how serious it was. Multiple times. You called it silly computer drawings and told me to get a real job. That was different. You were just talking about ideas then. This is an actual successful company." And there it was, the fundamental misunderstanding that would probably define our relationship forever. Jessica couldn't see that her support had been conditional on my success being recognizable to her. She would have celebrated my achievement after it was proven, but she couldn't support my potential before it was validated by external recognition. Over the following week, I realized that my family's apologies were less about making amends and more about managing their own cognitive dissonance. They needed to believe they were good people who supported their daughter. So they reframed their behavior as misguided love rather than conditional acceptance. But perhaps most revealing was what they didn't apologize for. None of them acknowledged that their assumptions about success had been narrow and limiting. None of them recognized that their need to understand my path had made them unable to trust my judgment. None of them seemed to grasp that the real damage hadn't been their failure to predict my success. It had been their failure to believe in my potential. Even when they couldn't see where it was leading, the apologies felt hollow because they were trying to repair the wrong thing. They wanted to fix their embarrassment about being wrong, but they weren't willing to examine why they'd been wrong in the first place. The new business cards arrived on a Wednesday. Simple, elegant, with just my name and title. Sarah Mitchell, founder and CEO, Design Flow. Holding them felt like accepting an identity I'd been hiding for 3 years. Not just successful, but openly successful, unapologetically accomplished. Everything changed after Forbes. The coffee shop let me go with genuine happiness for my success. The restaurant where I'd served tables threw me a goodbye party. My landlord asked if I was planning to move somewhere more appropriate for someone of my stature. But I wasn't ready to leave my studio apartment yet. It had become sacred ground, the place where I'd proven that extraordinary things could happen in ordinary spaces. The family dynamic shifted in ways I hadn't expected. Our monthly dinners continued, but with a completely different energy. Where there had once been concern about my future, there was now awkward pride mixed with residual embarrassment. Mom would introduce me to neighbors as my daughter, the one who was featured on the cover of Forbes, as if my achievement was somehow hers to claim. Jessica struggled most with the adjustment. During our first post-revelation coffee meeting, she spent 20 minutes explaining how her law career was different but equally important, and how success comes in many forms. I realized she was having trouble processing that her little sister had not only succeeded beyond her own achievements, but had done so in a field she didn't understand. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told me over lattes, "about trust and support. And I want you to know that going forward, I'm going to try to be better about believing in your judgment, even when I don't understand your choices." It was a start, but I could see the effort it took for her to say those words. Jessica's identity had been built around being the responsible older sister who guided the family, and my success had disrupted that narrative in ways she was still working to accept. David's response was more practical. He wanted to understand my investment strategy, my expansion plans, my thoughts on going public. Our conversations became collaborations rather than lectures, and I found myself genuinely appreciating his financial expertise now that it was offered as consultation rather than correction. But the most significant change was in my relationship with my mother. Our conversations became deeper, more honest, as she tried to understand not just what I built, but who I'd become in the process of building it. "I keep wondering what I missed," she said during one of our weekly phone calls. "What signs were there that I should have seen?" "The signs were there," I told her gently, "but you were looking for different signs. You were looking for traditional markers of success: job interviews, salary negotiations, career advancement. You couldn't see achievement that didn't look like what you expected achievement to look like." It was during these conversations that I realized my success had forced my entire family to examine their own assumptions about potential, about worth, about what it means to support someone you love. They were learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, that love without trust isn't really support at all. The professional world embraced me with the enthusiasm. People who love discovering hidden talent. Speaking engagements, podcast interviews, mentorship requests. Suddenly, everyone wanted to understand how I'd built something so significant in such an unconventional way. I became a case study in bootstrap entrepreneurship, in the power of quiet persistence, in the possibility of extraordinary success emerging from ordinary circumstances. But what I valued most were the messages from other founders who had felt like outsiders, who had built their dreams in secret, who had been told their potential was being wasted while they quietly accumulated it. My story had given them permission to trust their own unconventional paths, to build without external validation, to believe in their vision, even when nobody else could see it. I started a private mentorship program for entrepreneurs who were building in shadows, who felt like their families didn't understand their choices, who needed someone to validate their potential before the world recognized their achievement. These conversations reminded me why the 3 years of secrecy had been worth it, not just for the success I'd built, but for the person I'd become in the process of building it. The woman who had once hidden her accomplishments to avoid family conflict had transformed into someone who could set boundaries, speak her truth, and demand to be seen for who she actually was rather than who others thought she should be. Success hadn't just changed my net worth, it had changed my relationship with myself and my understanding of what I deserved from the people who claimed to love me. My studio apartment became a symbol of choice rather than limitation. I could afford any living situation I wanted now, but I chose to stay in the space where I built my empire because it reminded me daily that extraordinary things can happen anywhere. That potential doesn't need perfect circumstances to flourish. That sometimes the most revolutionary act is believing in yourself when nobody else can see what you're building. The letter that meant the most arrived 6 months after the Forbes article, handwritten on notebook paper by a 22-year-old entrepreneur named Maya, who had read my story and found the courage to pursue her own unconventional path. Dear Sarah, it began, I want you to know that your story probably saved my startup. I was 3 months into building something I believed in, but everyone around me, my parents, my professors, my friends kept telling me I was wasting my time on a hobby that would never amount to anything. I was starting to believe them. She went on to describe how reading about my 3-year secret journey had given her permission to trust her own vision, to build in quiet confidence rather than seeking external validation at every step. You show me that belief in yourself is more important than belief from others, at least in the beginning. That sometimes the people who love us can't see our potential because it doesn't look like what they understand as success. Maya's letter joined a growing collection of messages from entrepreneurs, artists, and dreamers who had found something in my story that spoke to their own struggles with family expectations and unconventional paths. Each letter reminded me that the real value of my journey wasn't just the company I'd built. It was the permission I'd given others to build their own dreams without apologizing for taking a different route. A year later, Design Flow had grown beyond my wildest projections. We'd expanded internationally, partnered with major design firms, and integrated with platforms I'd only dreamed of collaborating with when I was coding alone in my studio apartment. The company that had started as a solution to my own frustrations had become an industry standard used by millions of creative professionals around the world, but the success that meant the most to me was more personal. My family had slowly learned to see me as I actually was, rather than as they thought I should be. Our monthly dinners became celebrations rather than interventions. Mom stopped offering career advice and started asking about my vision for the company's future. Jessica and David sought my perspective on their own professional challenges, recognizing that my unconventional path had given me insights they couldn't get from traditional career trajectories. The relationship that transformed most completely was with my mother. Our weekly phone calls became deep conversations about potential, about trust, about the courage it takes to support someone even when you can't see where they're going. She started volunteering with a local entrepreneurship program for young women, telling them stories about the daughter who had built an empire in her studio apartment while everyone worried about her future. I've learned something important from watching you, she told me during one of our calls. Love isn't about protecting people from failure. It's about trusting them enough to let them find their own definition of success. The Forbes cover story became the first of many. I was featured in Harvard Business Review, invited to speak at tech conferences around the world, and asked to serve on boards of organizations supporting unconventional entrepreneurs. But more than the professional recognition, what I treasured were the personal transformations my story had catalyzed. I established a scholarship fund for students pursuing creative technology projects that didn't fit traditional academic models. I mentored entrepreneurs who were building revolutionary solutions, while their families worried about their unconventional choices. I spoke at conferences not just about business strategy, but about the courage it takes to trust your own vision when nobody else can see it. The little studio apartment in Brooklyn became a pilgrimage site of sorts. Other entrepreneurs would walk past it, taking pictures of the building where someone had proven that extraordinary success could emerge from the most ordinary circumstances. I eventually moved to a larger space in Manhattan, but I kept the studio. as a reminder and sometimes as a retreat when I needed to reconnect with the person who had built something from nothing. 5 years after the Forbes article, I received an invitation that felt like the ultimate validation. The magazine wanted to do a follow-up story on the most influential tech leaders of the decade, and I was being featured alongside founders whose names had been household words when I was still serving coffee and hiding my success. But the moment that felt most like legacy came during a family dinner when my teenage cousin announced she was starting an app development project for her high school computer science class. Everyone says I should focus on getting into a good college and worry about real careers later, she said. But Sarah proved that you can build something incredible before anyone expects you to. She showed me that potential doesn't have an expiration date. Hearing my story reflected back through the next generation, seeing how my journey had given someone else permission to pursue their dreams without apologizing for the unconventional path that felt like the true measure of what I accomplished. The woman who had once been told she was wasting her potential had discovered something more valuable than success. She had learned to define potential on her own terms, to build without seeking permission, to trust her vision even when nobody else could see it. And in sharing that story, she had given others the courage to do the same. The family that had once worried about my future now looked to me as proof that extraordinary things happen when you stop trying to meet other people's expectations and start building toward your own dreams. And the little girl who had been dismissed for her silly computer drawings had grown up to change an entire industry while teaching everyone around her a new definition of what potential could become. That, I realized, was a legacy worth building.